Good morning, my lovely people out there. Welcome back to Sunup on 7. Just before the break, we had a discussion with Leah Brown from the YWCA talking about the adult courses and, the help program that's upcoming beginning next week, Tuesday. Now we're jumping into our third conversation today, and we're here joined with Reverend Matthew Carricker, who's the author of a new book, Giving Christianity Back to Agape Love, a new paradigm for being church together. We'll discuss how it impacts the community. Good morning, Reverend. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
We're fine. Thank you. Good. So this new book, Giving Christianity Back to Agape Love.
Isn't it Agape? It's Agape, darling.
It's Agape.
Agape.
Yeah.
I've heard different pronunciations,
It's okay.
but
It's okay. You have an accent. It's okay. It's all good. When I heard you say "but" the first time, I was like, maybe he was just making a slip.
To Agape Love.
Agape.
Okay.
Which is very beautiful.
It's on. No,
Rev, I want you, because of Brandon specifically right now, to just define what agape love is so people can really get that definition. Because it's one thing to just talk about this, but give us that definition so people get context.
Of course. So in the Bible, which was written originally in Hebrew in the Old Testament, Greek in the New Testament, there's different words for love. Like in English, love is a strange word because you're like, I love ice cream, I love movies. But in the New Testament, like eros is a word that kind of refers to romantic love, philios, friendship love.
Right.
Agape is a word in Greek that refers to unconditional love, divine love. So that's sometimes we think of love as kind of a trade agreement, like you give me this and I give you that, but agape love is
unconditional.
Unconditional.
Okay.
So
I love you through every single thing. I love the
Right.
person and not like the sin and all these different things.
Yeah, so one of my favorite sayings is God loves you and there's nothing you can do about it. It's not dependent on what we do or don't do, it's always there. That's what grace is. So that's the foundation of this book, that we've kind of moved away from agape love into more sometimes fear-based beliefs, and so kind of addressing some of those and returning to the foundation of agape love.
Look at me learning something new
I love
today.
it. And then also, I'm kind of dissecting this title right now because I really like it. Giving Christianity back to agape love. So let's talk about that, giving Christianity back, because many people, and I'm sure me as a Christian can be able to relate to the fact that there's a lot of people lost in the church, and the idea of giving agape love is not something as practiced as before. So what is the idea of giving Christianity back, though?
Great question. So it all comes back to that word you just used, practice. So to give you a little bit of the history and context, in the 4th century, a drastic shift happened in Christianity. Before that, in the early church, Christianity was more of a practice. It was called the way, right? And that symbolized it was a way of life. It was, you embodied your faith. It wasn't just something you did on Sundays because that's what people did, because if you were part of a church, oftentimes you were martyred or killed. It wasn't just, okay, I'm just going to be a Christian. But then in the 4th century, when Christianity became the religion of the empire, it was the accepted thing to do. It was a social thing to do. And it became less about living out a practice of love and more about kind of these requirements and expectations of going to church and going to, and then all these things happen that you hear about, that I talk about in the book. And it became more about a set of beliefs, which when you look at Jesus' life, he actually had his strongest words for those who were too attached to their beliefs, that were out of alignment with love. Like he'd say, why do you, get so attached to the Sabbath, right? As one example, when, if your dog fell in a pit in the Sabbath, wouldn't you help it?
Yeah.
Right? And so people were so attached to the law and the rules, and as opposed to the essence of the law, which is love. And so that's the radical thing that Jesus said when someone came up to Jesus and they said, well, what's the greatest of all the laws? And Jesus said, pretty simple, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then Jesus said something radical. He said, and that is all the law and all the prophets. In other words, everything is contained in love. And so to the extent that Christianity has moved away from love towards fear, I think we've moved away from the core essence of Jesus. One of my other favorite scriptures is from 1 John chapter 4, where the apostle says, perfect love casts out fear.
Yeah.
And so sometimes our faith journey may start in fear. There's some scriptures that say the fear of the Lord, and that's fine. But I think the faith journey always wants to move us from fear to love. You might start out fearing God, but you want to end up with a place of loving God and loving others.
That's a very interesting take on it, and it's the first time that I've heard that dynamic as well. that, you know what, yes, it's agape love in the beginning, but then somehow as the radical change happened, it went more on fear-based. You know, you must abide to this, you must abide to that.
So belief, instead of set rules or
right.
all of that. Like,
so this, I note here that the book re-envisions traditional Christian beliefs, including sin, the Bible, salvation, homosexuality, pluralism, Jesus, and the atonement theology.
Yeah.
Could you discuss more about how your book brings that to light?
Yeah. So, you know, I struggle with lots of these things. So when I came to Belize in 2001 as a Jesuit volunteer, and I was teaching at St. Vernon back when it was an all-girls high school, and I was teaching religion. And you have to teach others in order to, you know, teach yourself first before you teach others.
Right.
And I was struggling with all these questions. So this is really, and right after that I left Belize in 2003, I went to seminary and was struggling with these questions during that time. And so this book is really the culmination of that experience. And just to give you one example, chapter 4 is called Oneness, right? And sometimes for me, oneness is synonymous with love. But the old paradigm of church has kind of been a paradigm of separation.
Yeah.
Separation versus oneness. Like you're separate from God, you're separate from each other. And so you see people who are Christian, who go to church on Sunday, who hurt other people, who hurt the earth, who are doing horrible things in terms of climate change. As opposed to if we have an idea of oneness, which actually there's a good scriptural basis for. In 1 Corinthians 12, it says that we are one body and many members. And so, you know, you don't slap your wrist to spite your face, right? Like it doesn't make sense. If we're one body, we're all connected. And so it's moving from that sense of we're separate from God, we're separate from each other. And once we realize that, then if I hurt you, I actually hurt me myself, because we're all connected. And so when you move from a separation paradigm to a oneness paradigm, you're actually living more into that love. So that's just one example. Another example in one of my first chapters, like the first 4 chapters are kind of focusing on agape and oneness. The next 8 chapters are focusing on some of those beliefs that have moved into fear-based beliefs. The first one is called Original Blessing, Original Sin. And it's kind of, you know, oftentimes since Augustine, the church has focused more on sin than on what Matthew Fox, who I quote in my book, calls original blessing, which is in Genesis, you know, God created humans and God said that we are very good. Now, just because sin came into the world doesn't mean that that original blessing is ever retracted. And so sometimes the church has never really emphasized that original blessing, that that's still who we are, that's never been taken away. And so that love, that light that God created us with is still who we are. And just by focusing on sin and that we do sin, I think has done us a disservice, because we always focus on all the ways we fall short instead of that we are, you know, like even though we're like a diamond that has all this mud on top of it, and just because it has mud on top of it doesn't mean it's not still a diamond.
And God still loves us through all of that.
Exactly.
That's the agape, unconditional.
Right.
I want to know, for viewers out there, you know, that has that hesitancy when it comes that people not necessarily have a faith or so, why would this be a good book to read for them? Because besides from people that are, you know, believers or so forth, talk to the people that are not believers. Why would this be a great book for them to read?
That's a great question. You know, for the last 10 years, about a year ago, I retired, so to speak. I was a university chaplain at Brandeis University. So I would talk to many students, some who were faithful and some who had no faith, and some had been hurt by the church. And sometimes in one-on-one conversations like this, they would tell me about the God that they don't believe in. I would say, well, I don't believe in that God either. Right? That God is more of a punisher and a torturer. Right, that's not a God of love, as I understand it. The God that Jesus embodied and taught and lived out. If Jesus was God incarnate and shows us what God looks like, that's not what God looks like to me too. So sometimes people moving away from church, moving away from religion, moving away from faith is actually people being faithful to the God within. Because Jesus says that too. He says the kingdom of God is within you. And so learning to be faithful to your own inner voice of love is actually an okay part of the spiritual journey. And so I don't fault people. I don't say like, oh, I have a whole chapter on hell here. And I don't say people are going to hell because they don't believe the right thing. That's a whole another conversation. But I think that's, you know, you have to be faithful and true to that inner voice of love. And if that's saying, you know, that I don't believe what's been taught here that are more fear-based, then that's okay. Yeah.
I love it. I really, really do love it. I think it's going to give people that have been searching for that understanding of how it ties and also what's been missing. And it's the agape love that's really been something that's been missing, because like you say, it all reflects back on that unconditional love, loving people as how Christ loved the church.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I always say. I've talked to many people about it, where there's so many people that are lost because believers are not showing love like they used to show love. So I think this is a great book where people can say, what is the way in which I'm supposed to love? Let's hone into also what's the oneness that I'm forgetting because I'm doing the separation, that I'm putting you in a box, I'm putting you in a box, which we're all together in one big happy, body compartments and everything.
Yeah.
So I know you also talk a little bit about here how to return to Christianity and give to Jesus the universal love and boundless unconditional love that we're having here. What really in the book kind of talks about that, or can you just give us like a snippet of like how does that come when we bring in returning back?
Yeah, so chapter 14 is called Spiritual Community and Being Contemplatives in Action. And I quote one of the scriptures from Luke's that talks about, there's this passage where it says Jesus spent the entire night in prayer to God. And then he goes out and he gathers his disciples, and then he goes out that next day and he heals and he teaches. And it kind of symbolizes if the faith journey is like a three-legged stool, you have to have all three legs to stand and be firm. And those three legs are contemplation, community, and action or service. And what I mean by contemplation is it's kind of an overarching term for prayer, meditation, different practices that we use to connect to God. And that's important. Otherwise, it's just activism, but it's not rooted in a life of faith and prayer. Community is important. At the same time, like many people have found community not life-giving. And so it's important to find a community that is life-giving, that's not fear.
Right.
But then also you want to translate that contemplation, whatever practices, prayer, into action, into how can I serve, how can I be a blessing? Because that's what Jesus' life also modeled. He didn't just go and spend the entire night in prayer to God, which he did to fill his spiritual cup, to connect to God, but he also spent so much time healing and teaching and blessing, and that's part of why we say, wow, he is an incarnation of God, of love. So to me, it's returning, and my experience of church in many different places, the U.S. and Belize, is that sometimes if you think of contemplation and action as like a seesaw, sometimes it's a little unbalanced in one direction or another. Like some churches just have all contemplation and we're just going to pray, but they've lost service and action. How do we embody that in the world? And others are very active, which is great, but they've lost that life of prayer and meditation and how do I connect to God? So it's all three of those, and in order to have a really dynamic life of faith. And so that's, in my work in the wider church back in the U.S., that's part of the work that I'm trying to do too, is to give the church back to those foundations.
All right. So we understand that the book is being launched this Saturday.
Yes.
Could you give us more details on that?
Yeah, so that's going to be this Saturday, January 14th at 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. at Om Shanti, right on 4th Street. And there's going to be food and drinks for sale afterwards at Martha's Cafe. I'll also be doing a meditation since we're talking about contemplation.
Nice.
So I'll certainly share about the book and do some excerpts from the book, but also lead a meditation. So people are welcome to that. That's the easiest way to get the book. If you buy the book online versus on Amazon or, on the publisher, it's $24 Belize, but I'll be selling it for a limited time for all my Belize friends for 20 Belize on Saturday if you come. So please come, and I'd love to be able to share more about the book. And that's
what time did you say? Sorry.
5:30 to 6:30.
All right, great.
Yeah.
So right at Amshante, you can be able to go have that great talk with you, maybe dive in a little bit deeper too as well, and also get food, snacks, and all the galore right afterwards. And have you probably signed the book too as well? Because I'm sure you should be doing some signing.
I'm happy to sign. Always happy to sign, yeah.
And this is really a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to this book because I know you've been working on it for some time too as well. It's not just like I woke up and I got this book. I didn't wake up like this with the book.
Right.
So definitely want to implore others out there to please, dive into it. If you're thinking, you're wondering stuff that the Reverend is saying that's really connecting to you right now, like, I thought about that, or I didn't even think about that. This is really your chance to dive in. It's not a big and heavy, thick book. Like, it has a good length, like a good size here, so it's an easy read. And I'm looking, the words aren't super small either, guys. Unfortunately, they're not pictures, but there's a really nice cover.
my mom did the artwork, the cover.
Oh, nice.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I also want to ask you to say some Creole words before we end up.
Oh, yes, girl, I have to do that.
He is a Belizean too as well, okay?
I'm married to Belizean. I have a picnic with a Belizean and US, so I good.
Love it.
We love it so much. And guys, Saturday at 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. Shante. You can go on also Amazon, like you mentioned too. So that's going to be for
$24 Belize.
$24 Belize. You can be able to get the book from there. But limited time for Belizeans to come out and get it for $20 this Saturday. So please make sure you come out and go and enjoy yourself. Dive into giving Christianity back to Agape love. See it right there, beautiful, just wow. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you
appreciate
so
this
much for the
conversation.
invitation. Appreciate
And
it.
with that, guys, we go to our next commercial break, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned.